Now, for the first time in more than 40 years, the UK is not at the top EU negotiating table and is out of talks surrounding its future relationship with the European Union. And in the UK itself, there's an equally noticeable divide. The referendum has seriously exposed generational differences and in some cases even caused rifts within families. Many young people who will have to live with the Brexit outcome the longest feel their choice has been taken away by pensioners and baby boomers, as Natalie Powell reports.
The gap between the older generation and the so-called millennials has never seemed so wide in Britain. Areas like the south coast of England, home to some of the biggest populations of older people in the UK, voted overwhelmingly in favour of leaving the European Union, while more than 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds opted to stay, and they aren't happy with the outcome.
It's much more something that will affect people in the sort of younger age range, but something that has been done by the older voters.
This referendum's happened in, say, 3 months for me. I'm 18 and I've had no say, and it's my future that's been ruined by an older person who wanted to save themselves for their retirement.
Now we're in a big mess with no plan and, no plan A, B, C or X.
This generation is angry and feels they've had their future in the EU taken away by baby boomers who've already had so much more than their generation ever will, such as free higher education and easy access to the housing market.
The anger with older voters, therefore, I think is misplaced. Older voters did what they thought was reasonable. They may well, of course, have turned out to be wrong, because now we're heading into an uncertain future without a plan.
And sympathy for the younger generation only goes so far, with some of their elders saying more of them should have turned out to vote.
I think the young should have voted more too, because obviously the young were busy otherwise and they're not usually very good voters. But now I think they are committed, and if we had a second referendum or general election, I think that would change things.
It's clear to see from protests like these just how divided the United Kingdom has become since the Brexit vote. And it's not just the generation gap. We've also seen geographical divisions and an increase in racial tensions, which means the British government has a great deal of work ahead to try to reunify what is a very fragmented country. Natalie Powell, TRT World, London.
Well, Natalie touched on some of the numbers there, but let's just take a look at them in a little more detail. The pollsters YouGov estimate that 71% of 18 to 24-year-olds who voted in favour of remaining in the EU. But on the other end of the age spectrum, 65% of those aged 65 and over voted to leave. But where it mattered most was the turnout. According to polls by Sky Data, the turnout amongst 18 to 24-year-olds was just 38%. Compare that with more than 80% among the over 65s. Well, joining me now to look at this a little more closely is Felix Marquardt, who's the Executive Director of the think tank Youthonomics. He joins us now from Stockholm. So, Felix, the bottom line here is that most young people in the UK wanted to stay in the European Union. Do you think they're right to blame their elders?
I think that they shouldn't be blaming so much their elders as they should be blaming, indeed, the nation state. The problem is that baby boomers have a natural inclination to go towards an entity, a prism, that they are accustomed to and that they have been accustomed to since they were born. And that natural structure of governance that they see as the be-all and end-all of governance is the nation state. But younger people can see very clearly that there's a level, there's a certain obsolescence of the nation state that is clear to their eyes.
But perhaps they should perhaps they should be blaming themselves then. Why didn't they turn out in higher numbers? They couldn't match the baby boomers and the elderly at all.
Well, because young people feel instinctively that there's something quite naive in hoping that nationally elected leaders, people who are elected by a constituency within a relatively small geographical boundary and for a limited amount of time, a quite short amount of time, will be adequately equipped to make decisions on what they really care about. the issues that this generation is most concerned about, they're very concerned about the local. They want to know what's going down at the end of their street, in their neighborhood, in their city. And they're very interested in what's happening at the global level. So they want to know. They want to know if you are in favor. What are you going to do about global warming?
Okay.
They want to know what you're going to do about
opportunities
depletion
and jobs for young people. How will this referendum affect young people in Britain and across Europe?
Well, basically, if you want to tackle the chronic problem that youth unemployment has become, or already has become in Europe over the past 30 years, there is no two ways to go about it. The only way to stimulate this growth in youth unemployment is to actually work proactively, I should say, to foster internal migration. The only way that young people can overcome the vicious circle that they are caught up in at the national level is movement. So to help young people, what you need to do is not build borders, not get out of the EU, not make a sense that the nation, build a sense that the nation is the key to all their problems. It's not the answer to their problems. The way to go forward is to actually foster internal migration within the EU.
Felix, just one more and final question for you. In your article, you wrote that we live in a world run by elders and baby boomers for elders and baby boomers. How would you propose changing that?
I think that one of the key answers to that question is not to organize referenda for self-interested, opportunistic reasons. I think the answer to that question is proportional representation of generations. Iceland is the only country in the world that has introduced a level of proportional representation of generations when they wrote their last constitution, and that is the way the world should move in the coming years.
So most young voters didn't get what they wanted, but there are some who are benefiting very nicely from all the chaos. Let's get the details with our editor-at-large, Craig Copetas. So Craig, who's making out of this situation?
Well, first of all, the countries of Malta, Luxembourg, and Ireland, because a lot of banks are going to be going to those countries. On top of that, it's been a bonanza for lawyers and management consultants. Chaos requires attorneys and accountants, and they have come out in droves. In fact, hours after the polls closed last week and the vote was known, the management consulting firm Deloitte held what they called a web conference for their clients. 7,000 of them showed up to hear what Deloitte had to say about how they could go about moving to other locations.
We're hearing rumors and we're seeing facts on the ground as well. A lot of investment banks in the city, the Square Mile, are looking to move their operations. So who will be benefiting from that?
Well, Matthew, I don't think our screen was big enough to put up all the banks that are moving. I think we only have 5 up there. There are actually 15, possibly more banks, and that's a total of some 50,000 people looking to move. And again, the banks are looking primarily at Malta, Luxembourg, and Ireland. And what's interesting about these countries and what you're going to see happening is they'll likely go the Swiss route, which means these countries will be negotiating tax rates like the cantons in Switzerland do to attract businesses. Because when you look at these investment banks, they didn't, Frankfurt is boring, sorry. They really don't want to go there, although a lot of dealing is done there. And do they really want to come to France, which is crumbling economically and are very high taxes? So Paris is too expensive and uncertain. But the other people that are really getting slammed on this are British astronauts, Matthew. They're getting hit real hard. They're likely not going to be going back up to the space station, because the International Space Station, if you're an astronaut who's not American and you come from Europe, that's regulated by the European Space Agency. And now that the UK, once Article 50 is triggered, will no longer be in the EU, that means that they're not going to be sending any British astronauts into orbit.
You see, that's why we have a segment called The Flip Side with Craig Copetas, because nobody would have thought about astronauts in this entire scenario. Craig, thank you very much for your analysis in Paris, where you're looking quite comfortable, actually. I think the bankers wouldn't mind too much.